So next we're going to talk about some proposals that have been made to reform the system that we have for paying for long-term care services. The first one, of course, is not a surprise. It's simply to continue the status quo. And by the status quo, I mean that we have a system where Medicaid pays for long-term care services for poor and middle-class people who have become poor by virtue of paying for their long-term care services, and trying to coordinate that care that Medicaid is paying for with Medicare. Because one of the problems in the past has been that the incentives under both Medicaid and Medicare is to toss payment responsibility from one program to the other. And this is not something unique to the United States. It's also true in the OECD countries where they may have an insurance system and some form of program for long-term care. Another proposal that has been put out there is what's known as the Partnership Program, and a third one is the Class Act, which was part of the Affordable Care Act. So let's talk briefly about each of these. So the Partnership Program was an innovative program that originated in the late 1980s, paid for by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the objective was, and continues to be, to encourage middle-class people to purchase long-term care insurance policies. These are special long-term care insurance policies known as partnership long-term care insurance policies, rather than the more general policies that are sold by insurance companies selling long-term care insurance. These partnership policies allow an individual to protect their assets up to the value of the insurance policy that they have purchased. So if they buy a policy for, say, $100,000, and after using all $100,000 worth of services paid for by this insurance policy and themselves, and then they need to have Medicaid take over in paying for their long-term care services, the partnership insurance policy protects that $100,000 that they bought this policy for. This is a great benefit to middle-class people who may want to be able to leave some amount of money to children or a spouse and don't want to use up all of their savings and assets to pay for long-term care services. You may say, why would a state want to do this? Why would Medicaid be involved in this? There's a huge advantage to the states and the federal government who pay for Medicaid in having people buy these policies because it postpones the date when Medicaid becomes the payer for the long-term care services of these people. So if they have a policy for $100,000 and that pays for, let's say, at least 1 year of long-term care services, or perhaps longer if they're getting these services in their home, then it is not Medicaid that is paid for those services during that year or year and a half. It is the long-term care insurance policy that is paid for those services. So the hope is that maybe not this year, but maybe 10, 30 years from now, when the people who buy these long-term care partnership insurance policies start using them, that the Medicaid expenses will be lower than what they would have been otherwise. It is impossible right now to see these savings because very few people have bought them. In fact, until 2008, we did not see very many states actually offering this. There was a 15-year period, roughly, where these partnership long-term care insurance policies were not allowed to be sold. But now they are, and 41 states are now participating. So far, the enrollments are small. But one reason for that, a big reason for that, is that publicity about them has been pretty slim. So if we want to see more of these partnership policies sold, we really have to ramp up knowledge about this, along with what are the risks of needing long-term care services. So another proposal that actually became more than a proposal, it was part of the Affordable Care Act, is the Community Living Assistance Services and Supports Act, otherwise known as CLASS. This is, or was, the biggest attempt at having some kind of long-term care insurance program other than Medicaid since 1965, when Medicare and Medicaid became the law. It failed largely because it was a voluntary program. People could opt out of it and not choose to participate in providing a small amount of money with each of their paychecks to have insurance against the need for long-term care. In particular, the amount of money that was supposed to be provided to people was only about $50 a day. And the notion here was that that would allow people to choose who they wanted as their caregiver. It would provide some amount of assistance. But that really isn't enough money to pay for nursing home or more skilled long-term care service needs. And the fact that this was a voluntary program meant that a lot of younger people were not enrolling in it. So that the projections into the future was that this would very quickly become a very underfinanced program. So a year and a half ago, CLASS was repealed from the Affordable Care Act. And the big lesson that we should take from this is that a voluntary program for long-term care insurance kinds of needs is not going to get the amount of financing that's needed to really pay for this very small proportion of people who need a lot of care, and then a not so small proportion of people who need some amount of paid care. So next, we're going to talk about issues that anybody involved in developing a policy for long-term care insurance will have to consider, and issues that are being considered by other countries which are having aging populations faster than we are.